Hi, head people. It is my pleasure to welcome you to another edition of my climate story with Tosin. My name is Tosin Kolaoli. Our planet, the home you and I live on, is constantly hit by the impacts that are driven by climate change. We all experience climate change, though in diverse ways and dimensions. Some people see climate change impact in the loss of the nature-based resource depletions. Others see climate change impact in extreme weather conditions. Some see it in the loss of the local river. Some, it's in the extreme heat. But some people, they see climate change impact in the loss of their ancestral homes due to coastal erosions and sea level rise. And one of such people who climate change means a loss of ancestral home to today is our guest. But before we introduce our guest properly, I want to ask you to please, wherever you're watching this from, to subscribe to our channel, like the video, and please share with your friends. Share with your friends what you see today. Subscribe to the channel and please like. Thank you and welcome back. Our guest today is Mr. Lavetanalagi Seru, who is a climate justice activist and has a background in youth development, gender and human rights issues, and also disaster risk reduction. He's currently the Climate Justice Project Officer for the Pacific Islands Climate Action Network, PICAN, the regional umbrella for civil society organizations working on climate change in Pacific. Mr. Lagi Seru is the co-founder and coordinator of the Alliance for Future Generations, a Fijian young people-led network on sustainable development, and also holds the role as vice chair of the 2021 United Nations Food System Summit. Is based in Nadi, Fiji. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Lagi Seru.
Thank you so much for having me on your show. It's a real pleasure to be on your show. Thank you.
We are so glad to have you here. On this platform, we talk about experiences of frontline actors and people who live on the front lines of climate change. And for you coming from Fiji, by the way, what was the experience like for you growing up on an island or on an island nation? What was the experience like for you?
Thank you. I grew up in an urban center, and for a few years of my childhood, and we had this great experience of going back to the village where we studied, and we got to be back from where my ancestors lived and breathed and worked the land, and it was a coastal community. We had so much fun back in the community. We enjoyed a lot of seafood, and everything was in abundance at the time. We weren't short of any resources. Everything was, either coming from the sea or from the land that my family and we farmed, and it was a moment to appreciate and how much people, especially indigenous people, lived harmoniously with nature. And then I moved back to town where I studied, and I now I live and I work in another part of the country in Fiji. We have about 300. We have 2 main islands and 330 small islands. The
Wow.
what one thing that is unique about the Pacific is you have all these many islands, and but also it's one of the challenge about the region is the geographical location and the remoteness from the rest of the world in terms of accessing some of the basic services in the rural and remote and maritime areas. Accessing health services, even education, can be a challenge. So all this experience of growing up in the rural and also in the urban center. I studied a bit in the boarding school, and then studied at the University of the South Pacific, where you have thousands of young people that are coming from across the region, other countries such as Samoa and Tonga and Vanuatu, Solomon Islands and Kiribati, who are coming in to study here in Fiji. And you get to meet them and to hear their stories, and that's when I started to realize this unique defining challenge of our time that we are facing across the region as you hear the stories of other young people. And I guess that's a bit about my background and about growing up here in Fiji. Thank you.
Thank you. You mentioned you alluded to some of the things you enjoyed as a child growing up. If you observe around you, what are some of those things you enjoyed you as a kid, but they are no longer there now? Looking at the vegetation around you.
Thank you. So, in our context, I guess one of the things about back then, and I go back to the village now and then, and I hear from my aunties and my cousins who are back in the village, is women would go out fishing and spend probably just 1 to 3 hours and come back home with about and they have fish for the day. And now it's becoming more scarce. The fish are migrating deeper into the deeper oceans, and they're starting to realize that somehow there's something that's happening with around them that's making this difficult for them to access ocean resources. At the same time, we enjoyed fruits of many varieties, native fruits, and sometimes we call and we speak to or we chat with our relatives back in the village, and they say, oh, it's supposed to be in season, but it's not. Or yes, it was a season, and we loved mangoes, so we used to have this mango tree, and whenever we know it's a mango season, we'd call back and ask, are the mangoes in season? And they say, oh, it did come. I mean, it was mango seasons, but it didn't bear as much fruit as before. So this natural phenomena that's happening, that's affecting the amount of catch that women are catching from the fish, the amount of the kind of fruits that are bearing fruits during its season or not, is a manifestation of the challenge that we are facing in terms of the changing climatic and also weather patterns. At the same time, back in I'm not sure if I'm preempting this, but back in 2016, one of the experiences was Fiji experienced was a tropical cyclone, and so far has been categorized as one of the strongest cyclones in the southern hemisphere. It was a Category 5 cyclone called, and it was named Tropical Cyclone Winston. And the village that I come from was one of those affected communities where we saw almost, half of the the homes and of our fellow relatives and kinsmen were either affected, fully damaged, or partially damaged, roofs blown off. Our family house had half of its roof that was blown away. And apart from that, we were also seeing some I guess even before, when I was still growing up, we were seeing firsthand how the ocean was eroding arable lands, and there we had one of my, we usually say talehu, which is my big uncle, or and he's got his residence just by the ocean, this big house, and it was under threat of either collapsing because of the sea that was slowly eroding away the land just in front of his house. So these were some of the things that we noticed back then when we were still growing up, and now it's becoming more and more difficult for the people to cope with. And yeah.
Wow. And so you notice these things, and at what point were you able to connect those occurrences to climate change?
Yes. So one of the, we it was not until I was in high school, and when I was moving on to university, when I started learning about how human activity is leading to to the global warming, which is leading to sea level rise, the melting of the ice poles, the ice caps, and we are feeling the brunt here in the Pacific, in Fiji, how local communities are firsthand experiencing some of the challenges, whether it's to do with loss of arable lands to the ocean, whether it's the loss of ancestral lands and burial grounds to the ocean, or food security, or impacted in the way that cyclones are becoming more intense and frequent in the region, and is affecting people in in ways that I can't imagine going forward that would be would be livable for many of the generation that are growing up, because we continue to see homes being destroyed. We continue to see schools and public health uh, infrastructures being destroyed, and young people are out of school for weeks and often for months. And it sometimes has an impact when, as a result of the cyclones, as well as the other flooding, young people are dropping out of school at a very young age, and so it's leading to other social issues. School dropouts, young people are not being able to go back to school because the family is still trying to recover from the damage that that has been sustained, and and so when they don't go to school, it gives rise to increasing youth unemployment, or even during disasters, as one of researchers, a plethora of researchers have highlighted that many of gender-based violence often happens during this period, because there's arguments over resources, about income, the lack of income that's being earned. And so we see this issue as a multiplier, because it influences, it impacts the other social sectors, such as health, such as education, um, and also we're slowly seeing here in Fiji a kind of shift, where there's a sort of a high internal displacement of people moving away from rural communities and moving to urban centers because of the, they're finding it hard to fish, which for years has been a source of income for them, a source of livelihood. They're finding it hard to plant crops because of frequent flooding or because it's a long period of droughts. And so they're moving to urban centers in search of employment opportunities, in search of a better life. And what it leads to is that they end up in informal settlements. They end up in, squatter settlements with very poor housing, poor sanitation, poor infrastructures, and it gives rise to a whole range of issues. When you have youth unemployment at a scale, uh, in these urban centers, you could see high increases in number of crimes being committed. You could see things like sexual and gender-based violence happening in these communities, and we are now beginning to connect the dots and say, as a result of dwindling natural resources because of the climate crisis or because of the climate impacts, whether it's sea level rise or whether it's a drought or cyclone, that we're seeing people moving to urban centers, and it's giving rise to a whole bigger issue that we are trying to also manage and control. And over the period of my work for the last few years, I worked for a LGBTQI organization. And we advocate for the rights of people of diverse sexual orientation and gender identity. And one of the things that have come out from the work that I did with this particular organization was often marginalized communities, such as LGBTQI communities, are blamed for being the cause of the disaster. So we had Tropical Cyclone Winston. After that, LGBTQI people were further marginalized, further discriminated, further stigmatized, and said, because of their sinful ways, God has sent us a punishment in the form of a cyclone to cleanse the country. And we had to go back to the communities, and we had to work with the faith-based organization and say, we want people in the community to realize it's not LGBTQI people who's causing this. It's a human activity. It's countries who've developed on the backs of countries like Fiji, who has a history of being a colonized country, and so has a history of colonialism. That this first major developed, high developed countries have already during the colonial period, during colonialism, has benefited from the back of our resources, and then now they're emitting large carbon emissions. They're digging up more coal, more fossil fuel, more oil, and they're contributing to what we see as climate change. And that's one of the awareness and advocacy work that we had carried out with particular groups to sort of address that narrative that LGBTQI people were the causes of disasters. So in many ways, we are seeing the intersections, and so it's linked to racial justice and the rights of indigenous people and how that has been impacted. And then we look at marginalized groups such as LGBTQI, and now we've done some good work all over the years with young people. So it's one of the things that we are sort of pushing for around intergenerational equity and intergenerational justice. How do we ensure that young people who are born tomorrow are able to live in a country where they're able to enjoy the kind of resources when we grew up had enjoyed. We don't want them growing up and not having the luxury of going out to to fish and being able to catch something and come back home and they have a catch. So those are some of the interconnections of the work around climate justice that's happening in the Pacific. So there's a whole lot of loss and damage that communities are seeing firsthand, and it's impacting the economy, it's impacting social security, because after every cyclone, the government does not have enough public funds to be able to respond to disasters. So one of the things that we've seen in the last 2, 3, or 4 disasters was government had to, open up this opportunity where people can access their provident fund or savings. So, if you are an employed person, every part of your pay there's a deduction, and it goes to the Fiji National Provident Fund, which is sort of like a social security mechanism, so that when you retire you have some funds that's sitting there. So I think there's a payment that you make, and also by the employer. So government had to open that up and ask people, like, we don't have, the option is the government doesn't have any more funds. So it's telling the people, like, you can access your social security funds now to rebuild your homes, or to do whatever repair works that you do. That's all fine and good. But in the long term, if people continue to get funds out of the Fiji National Provident Fund while they're still young, while they're still employed, to be able to cushion some of the impact of disasters that we are facing, then what does that leave them with when they retire? Do they have enough money then, or will they be out of funds? Because throughout the period, all they've been doing is withdrawing funds to be able to rebuild and repair and and recover. So it's impacting not only marginalized groups, impacting individuals in terms of social security over the long term. It's impacting education and health, and like I said, it's one of our challenges, our geographical location, remoteness between the islands. So it's making it harder for people even within the rural and remote and maritime areas to access some of the basic health, education services that is critical for them to be able to uplift and improve their way of living and their way of life. Yes.
Thank you. I mean, you've given us an array of impacts, and that people who live on islands and neighboring islands are exposed to. And in your conversation too, you mentioned the fact that this is it's a justice kind of it's a justice issue, considering the contribution of Fiji Islands to global stock of carbon emissions. It's very, very insignificant. So how do you feel as a young man being exposed to this havoc that is driven by years of living dangerously by the advanced global north? What comes to you? What kind of feelings do you have? Is it, are you angry about it, or what kind of feelings do you when you think of how your position, you're put in a position of injustice, you're paying for the price of what the nations didn't contribute to? What's kind of what are some of the feelings you have when you think about this?
When I started this work, it was filled with, I started, filled with a lot of anger, because we have so little to contribute to this crisis, but we have everything to lose as a result of what we are facing. Fiji contributes less than 0.06% to the global emissions. The Pacific as a whole is just somewhere around 0.03%. And so it's really a drop in the bucket in terms of the emissions. And because we are surrounded by the ocean, and we've always seen the ocean as a source of um, you know livelihood. It has always sustained us. It's what connect us as a Pacific. It's what have you know our DNA. Our DNA is connected to nature, to the ocean, and also to the land. And I've always said, humans, we are an extension of nature. Nature is not an extension of humans. So we've we've grown up appreciating nature. We'd go farming, and our elders would go farming, and they will take their time to farm. They would go fish, and they'll come back with the catch that's only enough for them for that particular day. They don't take more than what they need. And when we look, and I think this is the beauty about indigenous cultures and wisdom. They lived in harmoniously with nature. And one of the things I was just sharing a few days ago with observation was, our elders would go to the forest and collect medicinal herbs, or from a tree or from a plant. And usually it was the grandmothers, and this was one of their role. And as they broke a leaf from a particular tree, they'd be speaking to the tree, and they would be asking for forgiveness, and saying, I'm taking this leaf because I need to heal one of my relatives, and because we realize that nature is actually a living thing. And it's got feelings, and that's what we've grown up appreciating about nature. It's We are an extension of it. And then on the contrast, when you look at these first world nations, developed countries, who are, even we have all these kind of fishing vessels across the Pacific that's just taking everything big and small, the fish, using very advanced technologies. And then we see the kind of unsustainable but also irresponsible consumption and production. You have a big thing around a throwaway society. iPhone X10 comes out, or iPhone 10 comes out today, and people throw away their iPhone 9 and move on to that. It makes us angry. It makes us feel like there's it's just basically greed when we see these things happening. It's greed. It's people are just self-centered, and they self interest. Um, right here in the backyard of the Pacific, we have the Australian government, who's supporting the new coal mine called the Adani coal mine. And it's very we as the Pacific, we've lobbied, and we continuously to continuously continue to campaign against the Adani coal mine, because we realize that these are what happens in Australia doesn't stay in Australia. Whatever happens in the US will not stay in the US. We are the ones who are impacted in many ways, and often we are challenged by the kind of resources to be able to either adapt or to mitigate the crisis that we are facing. And um, and that's something that that now I'm sort of driven by hope more than anger, because I see young people, I see the kind of movement building and the work that's driven on the ground. Many young people are going out and planting mangroves, looking after the ocean, are doing cleanup campaigns, are planting trees. And I'm really hopeful now, because they're really making their voice heard, their demands heard at community, at national, regional, and also global level when it comes to demanding for ambitious climate action. And the other set of work that we are doing is we're trying to see how can we influence young people in the first, in these developed countries, first world nations, where we can change mindsets and also change hearts to be able for them to realize that their their consumption patterns, their production patterns, wherever they may live, is impacting us here in the Pacific as well as across the world, and of course, it's going to impact their future generation as well. And the Earth is lamenting. It's something that cannot speak for itself, and I've been hopeful, and I've just been incredibly glad to be part of a movement that's speaking up for nature and speaking up for the plants and the fish, and being able to fight for what is just and fight for a future that is sustainable for all of us.
Thank you, Mr. Lagi Seru. I'm curious to know. It's a fact that small island nations will be catastrophically affected by sea level rise in the future. That includes Fiji Islands, which has been experiencing serious heat by devastating hurricanes. So as a matter of fact, small island nations are projected that by 2050 to go under. As a young person with ancestral ties to the land, what does that mean to you?
It's very, I think it's just tragic to even think about those estimations, and to think that there'll come a point where certain island nations won't be habitable, where people have to move out of it. And in Fiji, there's already communities have been relocated. We've seen a community in the northern part of the island. There's a community in Kandavu that's also been slowly being relocated. And when we look at our Pacific Island neighbors, low-lying atoll nations like Kiribati and Tuvalu and the Marshall Islands, and the kind of experiences, it's not something I would say that is island nations are going to be drowned, in the future. No, they're experiencing it right now. And what's make it more tragic is the young people who are living these islands seeing firsthand those experiences and wondering, will they have land in years to come? Will they have, this relationship with nature, with in the ancestral grounds for years to come? And like I said, the Pacific indigenous people and their culture has always seen nature and us as one. And it's really, really hard to contemplate the thought of having to move away from your village where your ancestors have walked, have lived, and have to move to a totally new place. And this also is sort of going to give rise to other kind of social issues. For instance, moving when you relocate one community to another new piece of land, or another host community, there's bound to be arguments around, there's going to, or contest, people contesting over land and resources. The host community, there'll be a whole bunch of burden on them in terms of catering for the needs of the people who are moving in, who are relocating in. And arguments can start, and people lose their relationship between one another, as people have to break up as a community, as a matangali, which we call, and or yavusa, and then moving to another part of the country or another part of the community. So it's it's like I said, it's tragic to think about the impact that this is going to have on us. And I guess people are also, one of the beautiful things that we've seen is people are also utilizing some of the indigenous knowledge and wisdom that they have to be able to adapt and also to mitigate some of the impacts of climate change. And we've seen people who are building sea walls that are made out of coconut fibers. They are planting mangroves, they're planting trees, they're planting more trees, not only to give shade, but also to help cool down the environment, which is sort of becoming hotter and hotter, mostly in the Western Division, where my village is at. And so it's good to see that they're also using the indigenous knowledge and wisdom to be able to, like I said, adapt and mitigate the impacts that they're facing. But it's the loss of ancestral grounds, of burial grounds. This does not have an economic value. It's something intrinsic. It's something that people will carry with them for the rest of their lives. And losing that gives rise to the emotions that's going to come with it. And I'm not sure if we are ready as a society to be able to address those psychological and mental thoughts and experiences that's going to come with losing a land. I've seen a lady cry, and actually she's a very senior citizen, and she's lost her ancestral ground, and she cried, and I cried. I cried when she cried, and just for her to, like, when she was telling a story. And I don't know how much more we can cope as a people if we hear these kind of stories that are coming from the communities, because, like I said, it's something intrinsic.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your great thought and experiences with us. And in conclusion, I just want to find out from you. I am yet to visit Fiji or any of the small island nations, but some of the feedback I have from people who have visited in terms of like tourism and all that is that Fiji is a paradise, a threatened paradise. My question to you is, will Fiji survive?
Thank you. Yes, Fiji is a paradise. We used to have a slogan, uh, Fiji the way the world should be. And I believe Fiji is, I'll probably have a mixed response to this, because at one end, I'd say Fiji is a volcanic island, so we have mountains, and we have high um, hills and all that, so people can move to high grounds. Although like we're saying, it's not an option that we'd like to explore. So while we can do that, I think in terms of looking at the economic, the social, the cultural aspects, we have so much that we will lose. And I say that because people are, who've built their homes for, build their homes with the knowledge that they will retire in their homes, and they will spend the rest of their dwindling years in their homes. they just lose it in one night from a cyclone, or they lose it because of a storm a storm surge. And farmers who are planting, acres and acres of land, they lose out their agricultural production just because there's a flooding, there's a cyclone, or there's a seawater intrusion that's affecting their plants. And so if you look at the economic, if you look at the social way of life, people having to like I said, move from rural to urban centers, and the kind of social issues that it gives rise to in the urban centers. And if you look at the cultural loss as people move also from rural to urban centers, once you move to the urban centers, you do not have the kind of space where you learn about your own culture. And that's one of the realization for me when we were growing up in the urban center, is back in the community, the young people there, they're surrounded by their grandmothers and their grandparents, and these people are knowledge holders, they're knowledge producers, and most of those wisdom is transferred to the grandkids. And when you live in urban centers, you do not get so much of that opportunity. So we are looking at loss of language, loss of history, people losing out on their history of who they are, loss of burial ground and ancestral lands. So on one hand, while Fiji is geographically able to cope in some ways or another, and we can always relocate what do you call these coastal communities further inland. The social, economic, and cultural losses would be really heavy, and something once, and that's one of the things, like once a community is impacted, this generation down is still going to try to recover from that. And when you look at the other Pacific Island countries, small island nations like Tuvalu and Kiribati and the Marshall Islands, they are not so fortunate as us, because we have mountains, we have hills, they don't. Some of them is, the highest hill is about 2 meters above sea level. And it's a fight that not only Fiji, but also the Pacific is united in a sort of concerted action to push for political and also for climate ambition from world leaders. We are trying to use our moral voice as being, communities who have least to contribute to these crises are at the front lines, impacted, in the most worst scenarios. And we're trying to use that moral voice to hold these developed countries, and who in our colonial history has done this before. They've benefited from our resources, and now they are compromising our future for their greed, for profit, for throwaway society, in where they think things come easy, that you can always extract from nature, when nature has a limit in terms of what it can produce. So it's an ongoing work, and we hope that will inspire many other young people who have the power of voting in for governments who are able to commit to the kind of ambitious climate actions. And that's something that we are hoping that young Australians, even in our region, would be able to consider, is that whatever the government of Australia is deciding about the Adani coal mine has in many ways and will in many ways impact the Pacific Island countries and its people. It will impact our livelihoods, our security, and our well-being.
Thank you so much, Lavetanalagi Seru. Thank you. It's been wonderful and a lot to learn from you today. Of course, we can't exhaust all the questions we have today. I just want to say thank you for agreeing to speak with us. And we hope you give us another chance in the future to speak on some other topical issues. Thank you for sharing your climate story with us. And before you leave, it is our ritual on this platform to, since we often invite people who are climate or frontline actors, and some of the things you do, no matter how much you're paid, you can't be paid well enough to compensate for all you do. So we'd like to send some good wishes by. So I'd like to share this poem with you and to say thank you.
Thank you.
And the poem it reads, and I quote: "We give thanks for all those who are moved in their lives to heal and to protect the earth in small ways and in large ways. Blessing on the composters, the gardeners, the breeders of worm and mushroom, the soil builders, those who cleanse the waters and purify the air, all those who cleaned up the messes others have made. Blessing on all those who defend the trees, who plant trees, who guard the forest, and who renew the forest. Blessing on all those who learn to heal the grassland and renew the streams, and all those who have prevented erosions, who restore the salmon and the fisheries, on those who guard the healing herbs, and those who know the law of the wild plants. Blessing on all those who heal the cities and who bring them alive again with excitement and creativity and love. Gratitude and blessing to all those who stand up against greed, who risk themselves, and to those who have bled and have been wounded, and to those who have given their lives in service to the earth. Thank you so much. We appreciate you. Please keep up the good work. And I promise that we'll remain in touch, and together we're in this together, okay? It is one planet, the only home we all have come to know. So it's our responsibility, and you're playing your own your responsibility, and we're in this together. And with us, there's hope, no matter how hard and how tough the journey is. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Tosin, for having me. It's been a great pleasure. Vinaka.
Yeah. So, viewers, thank you for joining us today at this today edition of My Climb Story with Tosin. Until I come your way again next week with another frontline actors, please go and take care of the earth.